In today's video, you're going to learn how to create this particular satisfying cutting animation loop. We'll go step by step, so without any waste of time, let's start the tutorial. In our default scene, we're going to select the default cube and press SX to scale it on the x-axis by something really small, maybe 0.1, and hit enter. Then you can scale it on everything but the x-axis by pressing Shift X and bringing it up, maybe something like 5 will do the trick. Then you can press tab to go into edit mode, or you can use the drop down over here, and then you can select this button to go to face select mode or press 3 on your keyboard. Once you're on face select mode, just select this front face and then press I to inset it to an amount that you want. So I'll go with a thickness of something like 0.8 and hit enter. After that, you can press E to extrude and just bring it out by maybe 0.5 units and then hit enter, and then again inset it by pressing I, this time a depth of 0.05, enter, and then E to extrude it back in to the back and enter. Apart from that, we also need this edge to come out to provide some sort of a backdrop when we add in the camera. So we'll go to edge select mode by pressing this button, selecting this edge, pressing EX, and just bringing it out by quite a bit. We'll go with 10 units for now. That's all there is to model the background, but we have to go ahead and add in some modifiers. The first thing is that these edges are very sharp. You can't see the edges. To see them better, you can always use this drop down menu and switch on cavity and just increase the ridge and valley so that they become much more prominent. You see, the edges are very sharp. So to fix that problem, we can go to the modifiers and add in a bevel modifier. But the beveling is happening on these edges really well, but they're clearly not happening on this edge as much. So this edge is still really sharp. And in order to fix that, we have to apply the scale. So let's press Ctrl A and apply scale. Once you do that, every single one of the edges start beveling, but they're clearly beveling too much. So I'm just going to decrease the amount from 0.1 to 0.02 or 0.4 and increase the segments to something like 10. And that way we get a really nice bevel along all of the necessary edges. Once you have that set, we can press Shift A and add in a cube, which is going to be our main cube, and just scale it on everything but the x-axis by pressing Shift X and bringing it down to something like 0.75. and just making sure that it perfectly fits snug within the hole that you created. Of course, you can always scale it down a little bit more if necessary on everything but the x-axis, but the fit is up to you. Once you're happy with that, you can grab it on the x-axis and just bring it front by some amount. If you press 1, you can go into the side view and you can actually see how far you want it. Make sure you press Ctrl to snap it to grid, and maybe I'll start off with something like this. With this box placed exactly where you want it, you can press Shift D to duplicate it and now scale it on the x-axis down by something really small, maybe 0.1, and then grab it on the x-axis and just bring it out to that edge. Again, press 1 and then grab it on the x-axis. Make sure you press Ctrl and bring it till it perfectly matches up with the previous cube. This is the object that's going to get cut. Now we want this object to bend from this edge. So in order to do that, you're going to have to set this edge as the origin. So we'll press tab to go into edit mode. And in fact, instead of using this outer edge, I'm going to use the inner edge. So just make sure you're on edge select mode by selecting this button and selecting this edge over here. Then pressing Shift S, cursor to selected, then tabbing again to go into object mode, and then clicking object, set origin to 3D cursor. That way we have the origin perfectly over there, and any changes we make is going to happen from there. So we can add in the simple deform modifier. So we'll press add modifier, simple deform. Make sure that you're in the modifiers tab, that is. So change it from twist to bend, and we want it to deform in front like this. So the axis is the Y axis that it's bending around. So we have to change the axis to Y, but clearly it's not able to bend properly, and that's because there isn't enough geometry. So to do that and add in more geometry, we can press tab to go into edit mode, press Ctrl R to add in loop cuts, and just increase the number of cuts to something high. We'll go with maybe 100 cuts and then press enter and tab back out into object mode. Now you can clearly see that the bending isn't happening the way you want it to be, and that's because we haven't applied the scale. So again, press Ctrl A, apply scale, and now the actual deformation is going to happen perfectly. You can for now change the angle to 0 and leave it at that. And remember, this object also needs to have its scale applied. Although not necessary, if we do choose to texture it, it might be better to apply the scale. So we'll press Ctrl A, apply scale. Now that every object has its scale applied, we can go ahead and place the camera and set up our scene. So we'll do the defaults and the camera setup. To set up our defaults, we'll go to our render properties, switch on ambient occlusion, increase the factor to something like 10 and increase the distance to 0.5. We'll switch on bloom and screen space reflections. Then we'll go to the output properties, change the frame rate to 30 frames per second, change the frame range end to 90 so that it's a 3-second long loop, and then change the output folder to wherever you want it to be. File format is going to be FFmpeg video, but you have to change the encoding from Matroska to MPEG-4 with an output quality of perceptually lossless. Then you can select the camera, press 0 on your numpad to go into the camera view, press N to open the side panel and change it to view. Over here, check the box that says lock camera to view and then press N to hide it again. And now you can move your camera around till you get to some place that you think is perfect for what you're looking for. So I'm going to go with something like this. Once you're over here, you can go to the actual object properties down here and change these to the nearest whole numbers so that you know that it's placed perfectly. So first off, on the z-axis, I'm going to make it 0. Rotation on the x, I'm going to make it 90. Y is going to be 0. And maybe for the z, I can make it 45. And since I am rotating it that much, I'm going to have to grab it on the x and y as well, just to bring it back towards the center. So play around with these x and y values till you're happy with the positioning. I'll say something like this is all right with what I'm going for. So I'll press N and decheck camera to view so that we don't accidentally move the camera around later on. Now that you have that set, we can start off the animation. So let's just increase the timeline a little bit. Maybe go to frame 15 initially so that it starts cutting after half a second. Select this object cube 002, go to the modifiers panels and hover over angle and press I. Now you can go to frame 45, which is 30 frames later, that's 1 second later, and then increase the angle to something like 180 and then press I so that it actually seems like somebody just cut it off and it started rolling. So there, you could change this from Bezier to linear, but we're actually going to play around with the keyframes and the speed later on. So I'm going to leave it as Bezier for now, after which I want this to also fall down. So at frame 45, I'm going to press I, location, rotation, scale, then maybe 1 second to fall out of frame. So frame 75, G, Z, bring it down till it's out of the frame and then press I, location, rotation, scale. Now, if you actually play this, you'll see it doesn't seem too natural because it just falls straight. But since it did fall like that and rotate, it should actually continue rotating in that axis as far as how I would believe it would go. So I'm going to press 0 to go out of the camera view, press 1 to go into the side view, and then just rotate it on the y-axis a little bit more, maybe something like that. And then press I, location, rotation, and scale. Now, if you play the animation, it might seem like it's going a bit inward. So to fix that as well, we can actually just grab it on the X and just move it out a bit and press I, location, rotation, and scale. Now, it's also far below my camera view, which is not what's necessary. So maybe I'll go to frame 65, tap I, location, rotation, and scale, and then make this go all the way to 75, and that should be the animation. Now the thing is that it starts off slow, speeds up, and slows down again, but that's not how things fall. So I can start off playing with the actual keyframes. We'll change this view from the timeline to the graph editor, and we'll just bring it up a little bit more so that we can see everything better. And then we can press Ctrl middle mouse button to just fit everything into frame, and we can start playing around with these. So first off, the turquoise color is the angle simple deform, which is this particular handle. So we want this to actually start falling a lot slower. So we'll select this left handle and just scale it up on the x-axis, and that way it'll start off much slower and it'll flop much faster. So that seems all right, but it completely stops and then it starts falling. I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to have to search for the z-axis and just bring it back a little bit. So I can expand the object transformations, select the z location and hide every other keyframe. Then again, Control middle mouse button to zoom in so that we can see the z a lot better. Remember, if you move it left and right, it zooms on the left and right. If you move it up and down, it zooms on the y-axis. So you can scale it till you get exactly what you want. Now just select this, grab it on the X and just move it back a little so that it starts falling a bit faster. And how things fall, they don't slow down. We're going to have to take this. You can actually select both of these, press T and change it to quadratic because quadratic is natural falling. And along with that, I do feel like it's getting pushed out a bit. So I'm going to switch on the X location and delete this keyframe. So now it falls all right, but the rotation doesn't seem to be happening correctly. So I have to change the rotation as well. So we were rotating it about the y-axis. So just unhide everything but the y-axis. Again, select this, just move it back a bit by grabbing it on the X. And we don't want this to slow down either. So up here, we can take this and either scale it down or select both of these and press T cubic. We want it to start off rotating faster and actually slow down the rotation towards the end. So we're going to have to reverse this. To do that, I'm just going to select this and just rotate it a little bit and just play around with it till we're happy with the actual animation. For now, I feel like everything's happening a bit too slow after it falls. So we're going to have to just unhide the Z location, zoom into the Z. And even though it's not realistic to go from quadratic to something else, I'm going to actually change this to cubic just so that the animation seems a bit smoother. Once I'm happy with the actual process, I can select my camera, go to the viewport display and just expand it and increase passport out all the way to 1 so that we don't see anything outside the camera view. And I feel that way we will get lesser distracted and it'll just seem a little smoother. Once we're happy with that, we can start off with all of the background elements. First off, I just want a few spheres present here and there, which is what I tend to do for most of my satisfying animations. So I'm just going to search for a mesh UV sphere. I'm going to go ahead and click Object, Shade Smooth, and then press Ctrl 2 to give it a subdivision surface of level 2. Then scale it down, press 0 to go into my side view, grab it on the x-axis. Of course, I pressed 0 to go out of my camera view, but since the last view was my front view, it directly went into my front view. Then after scaling it down, GY, bring it out here, press 0 again, GZ, bring it up. So if you want to actually make sure that you're placing these properly, you can always go to the object properties here and just play around with the values here itself to make sure that it's placed perfectly. Then you can go back into your camera view, grab it on the Y, bring it to somewhere like this, then press Alt D so that all of the duplicates have the same materials and everything. Then press Y and bring it out and just place it to some place that you think seems all right. Then again, Alt D, Y, bring it here. Maybe this one I'll scale it down a little bit. Then I'll press GZ to bring it down and then Alt DZ, bring it up. So if this one has a value of 1.3, maybe this one can have a value of minus 1.3, and then shift select this one, press Alt D X to bring it out this time, and then GY, bring it in again to just about there. If you want to see whether you're doing it properly, you can press 3 to go into your side view, then again grab it on the Y till it's perfectly matching up, and there you have these two objects. And that's about it for my side objects. Now I need something to actually cut this object. So to do that, I'll press Shift A and search for a cylinder. I'll expand it and increase the vertices to maybe 64. And then I'll just scale it down to 0.01 and scale it on the Z axis by maybe 100, maybe even more. So scale on the Z2, SZ2 again, and then grab it on the Y axis to bring it to the side. Now remember, because your 3D cursor was present perfectly over here, it's going to get added exactly over there, which is perfect for what we wanted to do. Now it's fairly close to the wall, which is absolutely fine. Then I'm just going to take it, press Shift D, enter, or X90, switch on overlays again so that you can see what's happening, and then grab it on the Y and just bring it out. And of course, scale it on the Y if necessary. And about that is fine. So now you can take this on the Z to move it up. And to attach this to this particular cylinder, you can take it, maybe press Shift A, add in some torus, scale it down, press 7 to go into the top view, GY, and bring it right to the edge, and then continue to scale it down, GY, and just place it at the center, GZ, take this, press Shift S, selection to cursor so that it comes down perfectly to the same height as our torus that we just created. Take the torus as well, maybe add in a subdivision surface of level 2 by pressing Ctrl 2, then clicking Object, Set Shade Smooth. Do the same thing for all of these objects as well. Object, Set Shade Smooth. Select this cylinder, then select this torus and press Ctrl P, Set Parent to Object. So now if you actually move the torus, this cylinder also moves. And this cylinder is going to essentially be our laser that's cutting the object. So the laser should be a lot thinner, so we can select it. Press S, Shift Y, and just decrease the size a little bit. And there you have the laser. Once you're happy with all of that, we actually need to make the remaining animation so that we can loop it perfectly. The first thing is, after it falls, we need this cube to come out to the exact size that it was before. So we'll press 0 to go out of the camera view, go to the frame just before it starts falling. So maybe I'll go with frame 55. So it's just started to fall. I'll select the cube, press I, location, rotation, scale, and then go to frame 90 itself and just grab it on the X by that 0.1 units, and then press I, location, rotation, scale. And you can also change this back to the timeline. Press 1 to go into the front view, grab it on the X, make sure you press Control so that you snap it to grid and move it by either 0.1 units or 0.2. I forgot which one it was. So I'm just going to delete the keyframe. I'm going to go back to a frame where this object is still present. Then with this object present, select this object, press GX, and just see that, okay, we had to move it by 0.2 units for it to be perfectly the same. So then I can go to frame 90, then GX 0.2, and then press I, location, rotation, and scale. So then it nicely moves out as well. And that can be made linear or Bezier. It's perfectly all right. So that way you get the perfect loop. To see the loop, you can go to the rendered view and you'll see how it's present at frame 0 and frame 90. It looks the exact same. So that means that it's a perfect loop. Now we can actually animate the movement of this laser. So we can select the torus, go to frame 1 and just grab it on the z-axis to move it completely outside the camera view. Press I, location, rotation, scale. Then at frame 15, we just started cutting this object. So we'll go to frame 15 itself, press GZ and bring it down till it's just above the object, and then press I, location, rotation, and scale. And then you see it gets cut till the bottom by frame 23 or 25. So again, by frame 23, we'll press GZ and bring it fairly close to the bottom. So somewhere around there. Press I, location, rotation, scale. And then it finishes getting cut all the way at frame 45. So at frame 45, we'll press GZ and just bring it below the object. Make sure you press Shift for smoother control and then press I, location, rotation, scale. And then by 90, it can go completely out of frame. So at frame 90, press GZ and bring it completely out of frame. I, location, rotation, scale. So now that's what it looks like. And I think that looks perfectly all right for my animation. Now we can start off with all of the materials. So we'll go back into a viewport shading of solid. The first thing is I don't want the light. So I'm going to select the light and press delete to get rid of it. Then I'll go to the world properties and increase the background color from this dark gray to a complete white. And then I'll start off giving materials to each of these. I'll start off with the background cube that originally was created. I'll go to the materials and it already has the default material added to it because it was the default cube. I'll change the timeline from the timeline to the shader editor. I'll zoom in and start off by making it much more metallic, maybe 0.8, reducing the roughness to maybe 0.3, just so that there are some reflections seen. The base color, I'll make it very slightly bluish. So I'll make it completely white and slightly bluish. So maybe a saturation of 0.5 and a hue of 0.5 as well. And I think for the ambient occlusion, I'm going to increase the distance to 1 just to make these a lot more prominent. After that, I'm going to select our sphere, give it a new material. And for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and reduce the roughness all the way to 0 so that they become completely reflective. And the base color, I'm going to change to black. So that's those materials. Next, for the actual object that's going to be sliced, add in a new material. This one can also have a fairly low roughness, maybe 0.1. and a metallic value of 0.1 as well. And I'm going to change this one's base color to a dark color as well. Now we have to apply the same material to this object that we created. So select it and then shift select the material that we just gave the object to. Press Ctrl L and then click link materials. So there we have the object. And I think a few more details can be added in, such as our cylinder that's acting as the main rod. We can give that a more metallic look. So just increase the metallic value all the way to 1. And I think I can actually scale it as well. So I'm just going to scale it on everything but the z-axis to make it a little fatter, just so that it's more visible. Same thing I'm going to do with the torus. I can give it the same metallic material and again, scale it up. But now the problem is that keyframes were added in for all 3 of the properties, location, rotation, and scale. So I'm just going to have to go back to the timeline, expand it, go to object transformations. And for the scales, I'm just going to have to select all of them, X, Y, and Z scales. Press B for box select and select all of them. Press X, delete keyframes. So now it's going to remain that size itself. Similarly, I need this object, which is our laser, to have a more emissive material. So click new to add in a new material. Base color, I'm going to make it a yellow laser because I like the blue and yellow combination. Value has to be all the way to 1 and emission has to be that color with an emission strength of something really high. Let's go with 100. So there we have the laser cutting right through it. Along with that, for the back plane, I want to make a few more changes. So I'm going to go back to the shader editor. The base color, I want it to have a few black dots. So I'll press Shift A and search for a Voronoi texture because that's what helps us get dots. Press Shift A and search for a color ramp and then just plug the distance into the factor. Of course, with the node wrangler switched on, we can press Ctrl T to get the texture coordinate mapping nodes and then switch it from generated to object. And then for the white color, we want to use this color that we just created. So we'll hover over this, press Ctrl C, then hover over this and press Ctrl V. And then we can bring this in and plug this into the base color. So now we can bring the black in as well so that we can start seeing the black dots. And there we have the dots. If you want to increase the number of dots and reduce the size of them, again, you can just increase the scale, maybe a scale of 10, and that'll just increase the number of dots. So that looks fine for now with that. Next up, these spheres, they need some sort of texture as well. So for these objects, I'm actually going to increase the metallic all the way to 1. And I think that's just going to look a little better. If you do want, you could actually make this a nice metal color. So like nice gold or something. And I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have some of them this type of a shiny, slightly goldish metallic color. And maybe I can take this one, press Shift D, Shift X, move it out here, and then change it to have a new material and make these black. Maybe this one can be black. I can press Shift D or Alt D, Y, Z, bring it down so that this one also remains black, and maybe one more on this wall. So Alt D, Y, G, X, G, X, G, Z, about there. As usual, you can just make sure that you have the placements absolutely perfect if you want. So that's about it for this tutorial. The last thing that's left to do is press render animation. Hopefully you learned something from this tutorial and can use it to create really satisfying animations with various different shapes and various different scenarios. Remember, this file will be present on Patreon, and you can download both the animation as well as the blend file or just wallpapers if necessary. Every single video that I create, which is every single day, is uploaded on Patreon as well. So feel free to check that out if that interests you. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next video that comes out tomorrow, keep creating and stay creative.